Okay, good morning, everyone from London, and to those of you who have joined us from Europe. And for all of you who are tuning in today from Singapore and Southeast Asia, very good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us at our virtual event on sustainable food and farming, hosted by the Singapore Global Network and the Singapore Economic Development Board. I am Bao Hui from Singapore Global Network, or SGN for short, and I will be your host for today's session. I oversee SGN's engagement in UK and Ireland, and I have with me today my colleagues Jessie and Alberini, who jointly look over our efforts in continental Europe. So a really quick introduction of SGN before we begin proper. We are part of the Singapore Economic Development Board that engages with our global community of overseas Singaporeans, expats living in Singapore, as well as friends of the city-state. At SGN, we're here to foster connections between members of our community and to bridge our community to news and opportunities in Singapore, as well as wider Southeast Asia. Okay, so just some house rules before we dive right into the panel discussion so that we can make this fruitful for everyone. Please to respect our speakers and other participants whilst they're speaking, and just ensure that your microphone remains muted for the entire duration of the event. We'll also be muting your microphones should there be any disturbances. And of course, we would like to hear your questions, so please submit them via the Q&A function that's located at the bottom of your screen. And please also do upvote the questions that you'd like to see answered by our speakers today. Due to overwhelming interest, we won't be able to take everyone's questions today, but we'll definitely try our best to address a few of the top voted ones. Also, this event is being recorded and will be made available in the coming weeks. So stay tuned to our SGN YouTube channel if you'd like to replay today's session. So for today's event, we will begin with a sharing by AgFunder, followed by a panel discussion with our speakers from across Europe and Southeast Asia before we open the floor to questions. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to John Friedman, Executive Director at AgFunder Asia, who will share an overview of trends in sustainable food and farming across Europe and Southeast Asia. Prior to joining AgFunder, John spent over a decade in investment banking and is an advocate for a more impact-focused approach to capital allocation. In addition to serving on the AgFunder investment team, John is an angel investor in several agri-foodtech ventures, ranging from alternative proteins to consumer marketplace. So without further ado, John, please.
Thanks very much, Bao Hui, and good afternoon from beautiful Singapore. Good morning to everyone tuning in from Europe. And, a big thanks once again for spending your time here with us as we discuss this very important topic of food system sustainability. Thanks again to the Singapore Global Network and EDB for pulling us all together. I'm really excited to share a few updates on the investment trends that we're observing in the agri-food tech sector and the evolution, as I say, towards advancing a more sustainable food system. So as Bao Hui introduced, my name is John Friedman. I'm the Executive Director of AgFunder and Grow Accelerator. You'll be hearing more from my colleague and CEO, Josh, later on. But first, a brief introduction to AgFunder. We're a venture capital fund manager originally set up in 2013 in Silicon Valley. And today we are one of the most active agri-food tech investors, specifically in the early stage, with over 50 investments ranging from as early as pre-seed to Series B across our portfolio. And we've got offices today, as I said, in Silicon Valley, here in Singapore, as well as reporters on 4 continents around the world. So in addition to our investment activities, our media channel, AdFunder News, has established itself as one of the leading voices and sort of go-to knowledge sources for the industry of agri-food technology. We enjoy over 2 million yearly site visits, and our annual publications provide insights into the thematic trends and overall investment evolution of the agri-food tech sector. Already this year, we have seen more than $23 billion invested across ag tech and food tech startups globally. That compares to about $30 billion for the whole of last year. And this is all the more impressive when you consider that as recently as 2015, only 3% of venture capital was being invested into agri-food tech. Pretty shocking in my mind, considering that the industry is one which employs over 40% of the global population, and fundamentally it's the one on which we all rely for our daily sustenance. Yet the numbers speak for themselves. Happily, that trend of investment has shifted, and more investors and general public are now taking an interest in agri-food tech. An important development that we've witnessed this year has been the growing number of companies exiting, which obviously reflects a level of maturity in the sector as well as ultimately validation for the investors. Watershed moments such as Beyond Meat's IPO in 2019 and more recently Oatly's public listing have attracted significant investor interest and attention and paved the way for other next generation food tech companies to follow behind. This year, we've seen increased M&A activity amongst companies operating higher up the value chain, driven by an urgency from incumbents to adapt and innovate their service offerings. SPACs have emerged as an exciting avenue for technology companies to go public, and we're starting to see more consolidation among startups as well, with better funded companies looking to acquire new technologies that are complementary to their business models. Another interesting shift that we've seen in 2021 is a pronounced return of investor focus on downstream technologies, or those companies delivering solutions closer to the consumer versus upstream, which is what we would consider closer to the farm. So 2020 was actually the first year that upstream investments overtook downstream, as you can see here by the yellow bar, with strong fundraising in areas such as agri-biotech, controlled environment agriculture, as well as robotics and mechanization plays. However, for the first half of 2021, we see downstream technologies attracting $14 billion versus just $4 billion during the same period a year earlier. I guess this makes a lot of sense if we think about, if we think about the COVID environment and the backdrop in which we're all living, where consumers today rely a lot more heavily on technology for food delivery and grocery purchases. So again, this shows up in the terms of investment that these companies are attracting. Another category that we like to track is innovative food, which includes your alternative meats, proteins, dairies, novel ingredients, and so on. Now, this category, unsurprisingly, continues to gather pace, and we've seen close to $1.5 billion worth of investment in the first half of 2021 alone. This is on track to beating 2020's record investment haul. In fact, of the approximate $6 billion raised by alternative protein companies over the past decade, more than half of that was invested in 2020 alone. Now, investment in this space has been mostly dominated until recently by companies out of the US. But over the past year or so, we've now started to see new and exciting global entrants come to market, including the likes of Hura from Spain, or V2 and Fable from Australia, or even Next Gen Foods, the makers of Tyndall from right here in Singapore. And the market opportunity speaks for itself. In Singapore alone, sales of frozen meat-free substitutes grew by almost 27% between 2019 and 2020. That's over 3.5 times faster growth than in the traditional animal protein space. It's estimated that over the next decade, Asia will more than double its total food spend from $4 trillion in 2019 to over $8 trillion per year in 2030. So the commercial opportunity in this space is huge. Now, in terms of investment destination by geography, the US remains the dominant market for agri-food tech, with over $13 billion directed into 815 unique deals in 2020, as this chart shows. Preliminary figures from January until the end of June for this year indicate that the US companies have banked a whopping $9.5 billion in funding, almost twice the amount that was raised in the first half of 2020. So it's easy to see that we are on track to vastly beating the 2020 record numbers in total agri-food tech funding. Indeed, the top 3 spots on the leaderboard look unlikely to change for 2021, with Chinese and Indian agri-food tech companies enjoying solid investment flow through the first 6 months of the year. What's perhaps more interesting, if we look further down the list, is we see Turkey coming in 4th spot. Though I think it's worth pointing out that much of this $1 billion being reported is actually accounted for by a single outlier, Istanbul-based food and grocery delivery app Getir, which raised 3 rounds of financing in the first 6 months of the year, collectively bringing in close to $980 million in growth capital. Further down, we can see Singapore claiming the 7th spot with $700 million. This compares to just about $150 million accounted for in the first half of 2020. So really exciting growth and development of the agri-foodtech scene here on our little red dot. Lots of exciting things taking place, which I'm sure we'll speak about more in this session later on. Now, since 2014, when we first started collecting data, investment into the agri-foodtech sector has risen nearly fivefold. And 2021 has shown us that the challenges that we observe in the food system and the issues that we face today as a society are deeply interconnected, from climate crisis to biohabitat loss and social inequality, to name a few. These issues truly cannot be tackled in isolation. Right across the agri-food value chain, there are problems to be solved, inefficiencies to be addressed, and opportunities to be unleashed. That's how we believe, that's our mandate, to invest right across the value chain, because we believe that it's not good enough to be tackling one single point alone. And you'll be hearing more from my colleague Joshua later in terms of the type of work that we do at the Grow Accelerator here in Singapore, working with startups from across the world. I think, in closing, my message would be that we can all play a part, from technologist to investor to policymaker, and perhaps most importantly, a consumer, because it's going to take all of us working together to move the needle, which is why I'm thrilled that conversations like today's webinar are taking place. So thanks again for taking the time to listen. I'm including here my email if you'd like to get in touch and learn more about our work here at AgFunder or the Grow Accelerator, as well as investment opportunities in the sector. At this point, I'll hand the mic back over to Bao Hui. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, John, for the insightful sharing. So this sets the stage for our panel discussion, where we will delve deeper into the field of agri-food tech and what sustainable food is all about. We're privileged to have today distinguished speakers who will shed light on the topic. So to begin, I'd like to introduce our moderator for this session, Ling. Ling is based in Zurich, Switzerland, and is the head of partnerships for Europe at EcoBusiness, an independent media and business intelligence company dedicated to sustainable development and ESG performance. Ling, please.
Thank you, Bao Hui. Hello, everyone, and welcome again to our event. I'd like to thank Singapore Global Network and Singapore Economic Development Board for organizing this event today on sustainable food. And I hope everyone will walk away today hungry for more inspiration. I am Ling, Head of Partnerships Europe of EcoBusiness. We are an independent media and intelligence organization dedicated to sustainable development and responsible business. And I'm a moderator for today's panel discussion on what is on our plate. So first up, I'll introduce our two brilliant panelists. Next, and then I'll set the context for our discussion. And at the end of our 35-minute panel, we'll be taking questions. So please do stay engaged in our conversation and ask your questions to our speakers. So joining me on the panel today are Mr. Joshua Su. He's the CEO of Grow, Southeast Asia's first impact accelerator dedicated to agri-food tech that is backed by AgFunder and supported by Enterprise Singapore. And Mr. Jerome Wouters is the lead global connections from Food Valley NL, a non-profit agri-food innovation cluster based in the Netherlands, and acts as a catalyst for the transition to a sustainable food system. So why talk about sustainable food? We all know that food is essential to life and also forms a very important part of our cultural identity, and it plays an important role in our economy. And most of us we are aware that the food we eat is an important part affecting our health, but what is less well known is the impact producing and consuming food has on the world's resources. And the food we produce and we consume has a significant impact on the environment through, for example, greenhouse emissions, the use of land and water resources, pollution, and the impact of chemical products such as herbicides and pesticides. And many of today's food production systems compromise the capacity of Earth to produce food in the future. So globally and in regions like Europe and Asia, food production is close to or is already exceeding environmental limits. And then the price volatility, excess restrictions and increasing vulnerability of food production system today to climate change, to the loss of agro-biodiversity will make food even more inaccessible for the poor in the future. So there are many views as to what constitutes a sustainable food system and what falls within the scope of the term sustainability. According to the United Nations Environment Programme, and I quote this, a sustainable food system is a food system that delivers food security and nutrition for all in such a way that the economic, social, and environmental basis to generate food security and nutrition for current as well as future generations are not compromised. Although our current food system fails to meet the needs of people and the planet, there are reasons to be optimistic about the future. Emerging technologies present us with a growing range of opportunities to transform our food and agriculture systems. Hence, we see the rise of agri-food tech and agri-food technologies. We've heard from John earlier about the trends and the wave of agri-food tech that is brought on by billions of dollars of investments. So let's hear from our speakers on how this agri-food tech wave is going to affect what's on our plates and how we as consumers can play our part in equitable practices and in choosing sustainable, locally sourced food. So Joshua and Jerome, both of you, right, have worked with many innovative agri-food organizations or startups. Maybe you can share with us today, what are some of the very interesting agri-food tech innovations that you see that are driving sustainable food and farming in Europe, as well as in Southeast Asia and Singapore? Maybe, Jerome, would you like to go first?
Oh, yep, perfect. Hey, a warm welcome, everyone, and a great pleasure to participate in this panel session. Hello from Wageningen, the Netherlands. I have to apologize. I think the most boring background of all of us, but I was nicely positioned to show you the Wageningen campus, where a lot of activity is taking place in food innovation development, but the light was not so perfect. It's a bit of a foggy day also, so not too much of a interesting background. So this is we set it up right now. Hey, and yeah, a lot of things are happening in food sustainability. And at Food Valley NL, we have a strong focus on driving that innovation in the food transition that is in front of us. And we have basically selected 3 topics: circular agri-food, in which we work a lot on all those circular topics. I will address that in a moment. But also the topic of protein shift, and that is indeed a very relevant one in the balance between animal-based type of protein consumption and plant or alternative protein consumption. And the third is food and health, and that topic relates, of course, very well with also address to provide nutrition, which is nutritious also for all of us in the world. And with that, I would like to start off with one example. I'm working also, you see in my resume, I'm Global Connections at Food Valley NL, so in this platform. But next to that, I'm also the Innovation Manager in Sports and Nutrition at the Dutch Olympic Training Facilities. And then you would think, yeah, that is people that are training a lot and doing exercise in a very intensive way. But the fun thing for that is also that these people are very focused on, hey, what are the actual nutrients we need and how can we tailor that and how can we bring that in a sustainable way. And one of the topics there is also personalized nutrition, that you understand consumers, what they're actually eating, how much they are eating, and how it matches with their daily activity, for example, whether it's heavy exercise or moderate activity. And I think that is also one good thing, especially for Western society, to put that also in the sustainability picture, to have the right nutritional intake and prevent also the obesity type of orientation. Another aspect which is also taking place with the athletes is the strong wish to also have a diet which is consisting of more plant-based options. And there we see also in the Netherlands, and the topic of protein shift I also mentioned, a lot of development of very interesting novel protein sources. It can be protein-rich crops mainly, that can be converted into very nice meat analogs. And we have heard examples also earlier by John, multiple ways of applying that. And I think that is one of the great examples I see right away, where it is also practical for the consumer in a wider availability. And I think that's maybe one to start off with, and more will follow. Is that good to start? And then maybe Joshua can add.
Yeah, Joshua, maybe you would like to share what are some of these interesting agri-food tech innovations that you see in the course of your work?
Sure, I can jump in. Thanks so much. Thanks for setting the scene, Jerome. I think it's good to see types of companies and innovation that's happening across the food space in general. I'm actually not too far away from you, Jerome. So I'm in Germany now. Okay. We're usually based in Singapore. That's where the Grow Accelerator is at. And next week I'll actually be in Amsterdam. So we could actually meet face to face.
Yeah, let me know.
Unique. Yeah. So you highlight around personalized nutrition. That's definitely an interesting area that we see in Asia, particularly in Singapore. I know there's an interest in that. I know Thailand as well, but given there's an aging population, there's a lot of interest around food for the elderly. So yeah, but I think that's of particular area of interest. What I might share is just some of the key mega food trends that we see across the world are actually also quite of interest to countries here in Asia and Southeast Asia in particular. I'll probably maybe highlight 4 in particular, and then maybe call out a few companies of what they're doing to just give a bit of life into some of the technologies that we're seeing from this space. So the 4 areas that we see would be obviously alternative protein. That's definitely a hot one, no matter where you're at in the world right now. Then there's waste upcycling and management of food loss, which is a particular interest for Singapore because I think it's ranked one of the highest countries in the world, or maybe in Asia. Maybe I better be careful with my stats here, but it's ranked up there in terms of the amount of food loss that we see in this space. In terms of novel food production and supply chains, again, given Singapore's interest now in food security and wanting to produce more locally, this is an area of particular interest. But also in terms of supply chain, I know with COVID in particular, everyone's talking around supply chain resilience. We're looking at a lot of solutions coming from there. And lastly, packaging. So packaging is huge within the food and agriculture space. So we're looking at new sustainable solutions emerging there. So those are the 4 areas. I'll just flesh out a little bit with the companies. So from the alternative protein space, for example, like Green Rebel, one of the companies that we work with, they're looking at plant-based meats, Asian flavored, clean produce, clean label. So that's the kind of companies that we're seeing that are also emerging in Asia, not just being imported from overseas into Asia. Like lab-grown meat is of course again of particular interest. SingCell, for example, a local Singapore company here, is looking at producing bioreactors to enable other cell ag companies to manufacture their products. Now, the second theme around waste upcycling, and one Singapore company called Cross Group, they take excess bread and fruit to convert that into beverages, which is quite nice. I've had a few myself and can rate them quite highly there in terms of flavor and taste. Supply chain, you've got a lot around control environment ag. Syngrow, for example, a local Singapore company growing strawberries in a tropical climate, which is like, whoa, can you even do that? As far as technologies coming out from India, I know that's not really Southeast Asia, but they bring a dehydration unit to the farm gate, so you can reduce food loss. You can extend the shelf life of produce. For example, like tomatoes, they ground it into like powder and dehydrate it, so it lasts longer. And it's also encouraging women micro entrepreneurs in India as well in the process. And lastly, I know I'm sort of like rattling on a little bit, but in terms of packaging, we're looking at companies using coconut husks to create insulation packaging, for example, with cocoa for tuna cools, or even pallets, to transport food products. They're using coconut to create pallets. That's with Cocoa Pallet. And actually, the technology comes from the Netherlands.
Thank you so much, Joshua, for sharing so much. Is anything else that you'd like to add on, Joshua or Jerome? No? Actually,
I could. Oh.
Okay, Jerome, please. Go ahead.
Yeah. Because in this circular agri-food field where we're active, as I mentioned, we also look throughout the value chain where actual changes or nice innovations are taking place. And if you look at it, maybe categorize that, we see activities in primary production, around food processing, and also at the consumer side. And I think that are all relevant places to streamline those activities. Now, in primary production, we see a lot of developments, of course, in efficiency and reduction of pesticides in the best possible way, but also the new development of vertical farming is, of course, a very interesting one. And I think it's already in application or development also for locations like Singapore, that is real great to think along those lines, how many piles of levels of cultivation can take place, and what is the efficiency also that is being obtained. And I think that is really on the boundary of getting more into the point of view. But I also like some items also mentioned by Joshua, the cultured meat and things like, hey, how can we produce food from reactor type of systems, but also algae production, for example. And we see some very promising, nice companies being active in that. And even the fun thing with the algae is that you can fine tune in which direction you basically would like to address the nutrients or the micronutrients they deliver, and also the selection of the type of algae. And then, of course, the production comes in, and then the application in the food product. So, yeah, those are things that maybe can require also limited space, but can generate considerable volumes also. And a key aspect in that, of course, both for cultured meat and algae and similar sources, also microbial produced proteins, is on the choice of the media to be cultured. And those can also be sustainable. So these can also be certain streams that are not so much in use for other purposes, and that can be then setting the basis. And then an intriguing one to me also is insects on that, where insects can also be used to, say, value certain waste streams, and that is a thing that's real in development. And if you look at the, let's say, biodiversity of type of insects that could be used, of course, mealworms are ones that are maybe not that attractive, but can be converted into powders. But we also see crickets and cricket burgers and those type of items. And I saw, Joshua, that you nodding, so maybe you were open to add something on that, right? Is that,
yeah, I agree. I think the whole thing around in algae is very interesting because it draws down carbon as well. And I know in Southeast Asia, for example, there are a lot of farmers. I mean, you can basically grow algae here, so you can actually improve the livelihoods of farmers and then plug them into the supply chain when it comes to producing products around that uses algae. I know a company called Seedling, they use algae to convert that into pet food. So that, it's pet feed additive, so it can improve the gut health of animals, which is doing both, environmental benefits, but also improving the health and welfare of pets.
Yeah,
perfect. And then the second topic what I can add is the food processing part. And of course, I think current industry is already doing quite a lot on efficiency in usage and water reduction and energy efficiency, etc. But of course, there's always waste streams, and how to utilize those is important. And Joshua mentioned also some examples of that. And we see, for example, very nice new innovative companies for orange peel usage in multiple ways, with certain extract that could also be used in cosmetics, etc. So to think about the circularity in those type of processes is crucial and interesting, and to minimize that waste in chain. And now in food processing, like I mentioned earlier, of course, also the development of meat analogs and finding the good ways to develop nice and palatable products in that field. And we have seen so many variants, pulled oats or soy-based solutions like Oya, and very promising, the meat analog. So that is a great thing. And then the third topic to complete the chain is towards consumers. And then it is, of course, also there to prevent waste and to be aware of that. And then it comes also a lot about maybe communication and thinking of apps, for example, assisting people that the storability of foods, how to utilize that or learn more about nutritional quality, like I mentioned earlier, also as one of the topics.
Okay.
Now, and I hope that gives some of those pathways in that respect. Yeah,
there's a lot happening, definitely.
Yeah, this sounds very exciting and interesting. Thank you for sharing all these innovations. And since we are talking about like vertical farming and alternative proteins, for instance, my next question would be, for like countries or areas that are lacking in natural resources, like for example, Singapore, what are our options then for ensuring sustainability and food security? I mean, we have some examples that you've given earlier, but what do you think are our other options, for ensuring food security and sustainability?
So given that's a Singapore question, I guess that might be directed to me. I think when it comes to food security, it's very much, I think you need to definitely involve the government in this, because it's a sector-wide initiative. And I think Singapore has been doing really good with this. They have a whole of government approach with multiple policies, really encouraging to catalyze this sector. In terms of what they're doing in Singapore to achieve food security and sustainability, they have this thing called like a 3 food basket strategy. So 3 things of achieving that would be: 1, diversified food sources; secondly, growing more locally; and then growing overseas. To give a bit of context to those who are tuning in, who are not familiar with Singapore's agri-food system, I mean, we basically import 90% of our food into Singapore. So moving from Australia to Singapore, I remember 2 years ago, I remember buying things off the supermarket and realizing, hey, all these brands I will actually get back home. And when I took a photo of my food cart and sent it to my friends, they say, why are you buying all, Aussie produce there? I say, well, because we import everything here.
Yes.
And obviously, as you know, it's not sustainable in that regard, especially now with all the travel restrictions and supply chain disruption. The country is definitely looking at ways. One is, can we bring in food from multiple countries and not just rely on a single source or country of origin for, like, for example, eggs or like fish or meat. And secondly, in terms of production, obviously, can we grow more locally? And hence, with that initiative in mind, there's a lot more exploration around, can we have control environment ag systems to utilize spaces like car parks or rooftops, convert those underutilized spaces to food production. I mean, there are challenges itself, because you have to create a whole supply chain and see how you actually transport produce from like a rooftop into a supermarket. So there are things to solve, like obstacles to overcome.
Yes, agreed.
Yeah.
And Jerome, maybe you'd like to add, because it's not just only for Singapore, but any country or any areas which are lacking in natural resources. What do you think are their options?
Yeah, that is indeed, I think, a broader perspective, like city communities and how to be efficient in that production and also in transport. And I think on the one hand, you can think of local production systems. So local farming and vertical farming is, I think, then a very interesting development in that respect. And well, then of course energy management comes also in, but looking at the space, that is in principle a nice way. And I also see some other of those earlier mentioned aquatic type of farming or fermenter based type of productions. In principle relevant, and we will definitely see how that is contributing in the portfolio of food products that in a city or in a certain environment are available. The other point, and that is also in line with Joshua, I like the idea of locally produced foods and think about food miles also as a topic. How much has a food product traveled, and why do we as consumers choose those products? So that probably requires awareness of that. So the country of origin, that it is available and seen on certain packages. And I also like the way of handling, and it's of course also not always possible, but to think along the lines of let's say the food products that are available in the season, so the seasonable products, and that's maybe a bit different in Singapore than here in a European setting. But when there is certain crops available, use those as the primary activity and forget a bit about the others at that time. And of course, then conservation of those type of products is a crucial item also to have it wider available. But primarily look at this availability at that great topic. And I think we can learn a lot, and it will require also some creativity in maybe using kitchens and cooking skills, some creativity of chefs maybe to be examples for that. But I think we could overutilize that a bit more.
Thank you.
Yeah, actually, if I could build on that, I think 2 points that I really like what you raised, Jerome, was around seasonal eating and also food miles. So with seasonal eating, drawing back to what we're talking about around sustainability, we're so used to just buying food that we want in a supermarket. Like, all year round, you have mangoes, you have cherries. Well, not really cherries, but, berries and whatever.
Strawberries,
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, how we should actually be eating, I mean, you can look at how the seasons are actually changing and then actually eat according to it. So you don't put additional pressure on the land when it comes to producing the food, which then leads on to other areas where a lot of the, agri-food entrepreneurs and innovators are looking at, which is the diversity of crops. Can we include more, different ingredients, native foods into our palate? which then leads on to nutrition and the microbiome. So you can sort of see how, certain themes can then lead on to new trends, and then which opens up new possibilities for, founders to explore, new ventures to bring to market. In regards to food miles, I think that's also another one that's very interesting, because founders are now looking at, well, can you produce food and use the whole idea of origination and provenance as a key unique value proposition to build a business around, and introduce quite new novel solutions.
Yeah, well said, Joshua, and thank you both, Joshua and Jerome, for giving our participants today many ideas and inspirations. So for those who are looking to enter this sector, you have a lot of inspiration from today's panel. So going to our next question, actually. So as we saw, we heard from John earlier, right? AgFunder's latest research shows that in 2020, more than $700 million US dollars were invested in Southeast Asia's food and agriculture sectors. And this amount is actually a 66% year-on-year increase in investment dollars. And it's actually over 5 times the investment capital compared to 2015. So we're seeing huge potential here. And we heard from, I think I got this statistics from John, that Singapore took the top spot compared to, Singapore took the top spot followed by Indonesia in this region. So my question to both of you, Jerome and Joshua, is why is Southeast Asia such a region, why is Southeast Asia a region of interest for all agri-food tech startups? Why is there so much interest? Maybe you can share your insights on this.
Yeah, I can start, and Joshua, of course, knows the situation even much better than I will ever do. So, but what we are active in is also that we, from the Food Valley perspective, and also from maybe a bit more European perspective, look at, hey, how can we accelerate scaling? How can we support companies or ideas that are looking at one place, help being assisting to another place, and vice versa? And that's why we think there is a good and variable, fertile ground also in Singapore. Also, on one hand, as a strategic part to start and further develop, well, Southeast Asia or Asia in general, and support that. And for that, we also have a specific program which is interesting for to know about the, let's say, the pathway. It's an EU-funded pan-European project, so that is with multiple countries participating in that towards various countries in Asia to support scaling, basically, of larger SMEs to go to this new market and jointly develop. Because we know also that one technology is it's maybe working at one space, you need to implement it and experiment with it with the local category. And I think also with the context that we now have with Singapore and the people involved in that assist in, let's say, having those or ideas being settled or being investigated. And those are 2 elements. So also to have an adaptive environment at the location where we would like to collaborate with. And of course, vice versa. I mean, that is the crucial thing in that also, that we can jointly work on that. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you started, because I held back deliberately, because obviously being based in Asia, where there's a bias to sort of thinking that the market here is a great opportunity. But it's good to hear. And I think your point around scaling, why is Southeast Asia market of interest? It's for an international company is when you scale, which new markets would you want to look into? And I guess depending on, each startup's business, there's different markets within Asia or Southeast Asia that would lend itself to be a much more compelling market over the other. But I think in terms of why, Southeast Asia is emerging to be a place where companies from overseas might want to look into, could be on 2 things. One is a growing demand, and secondly is around the opportunity around sustainability. So with growing demand, we know the statistic shows that Asia will have a growing middle class, of which Southeast Asia has a role to play in that number. And so in terms of if you're producing food, agriculture, there's definitely an opportunity for you there to make a mark. But also with what Singapore's government's actually doing to be an regional agri-food tech hub. Only in 2019, they launched the Singapore Food Story. And from there, they anchored 5 accelerators, of which grows one of the 5. They found 9 key investment partners. So they're really mobilizing a lot of resources in this space. And then so really encouraging a lot of people from our overseas to sort of lean in and tune in and say, hey, you know, can we play a role in this? You know, is there an opportunity for us to be there? And so it served as quite a good soft landing pad, I would say, to explore a region which is so fragmented and diversified. And so that's sort of like what we've done here at Grow, where we have this initiative called Land and Launch, which is essentially helping overseas companies to land in Singapore and then launch into the neighboring Asian markets. Yeah. And then sort of just to round out the second point around opportunity sustainability, there's a report by Bayer and Company. It basically says there's a $1 trillion economic opportunity in the region by 2030, because when you look at how the Southeast Asian countries are ranking in terms of sustainable development goals, none of them unfortunately ranks in the top 40. So, you know, if you're an impact-focused agri-food tech startup, your ability to make a tangible outcome and impact in this region would be significant.
Well, thank you for sharing this great insights there, Joshua. Okay, so for the last part of our panel, I just want to bring us back to the discussion to bring the focus back to the individuals, so consumers, like you and me. Based on your experience, you know, in Europe and in Southeast Asia and Asia, how do consumer preferences and mindsets towards sustainable food differ, you know, between Europe and Asia? So,
great question. And well, of course, and in this respect, and I saw also one of the questions in the chat, is like the consumer behavior is a key thing also to sustainability. And I honestly saw a TV show here in the Netherlands last week on sustainability, and the typical response you see with a consumer, that there is always an excuse not to do something, or because there's a habits and pathways or things you are used to do, and there's so much maybe excuses, but ways that it's not so easy to overcome those. And I think there are very nice examples to assist in that. It's also a lot about communication, of course, also, but also to make it in a low threshold way available, to make smaller steps for consumers to get that adaptability. And for example, what is an interesting development also in COVID oriented is that, for example, we saw in the Netherlands, and I think it's in Europe also, somewhat reduction in meat consumption over time. And that seems to be pretty well explained by restaurant cuisinery that is, of course, reduced during COVID situations. And that thus also the choices in a restaurant are for consumers still, mainly meat or animal-based protein sources. And once you change the offering, I think also the willingness and the opportunity to change that behavior is there. And that's a trend we now definitely see taking place, that also by changing the offering, of course, you see the consumer behavior adapting in that way, and people are talking about it and sharing that with each other. So I think we are over a tipping point here in the Netherlands also, that we see that change in such an aspect to it. Another item, for example, is that, and that's also an EU topic, is how to identify if a product is more or less sustainable. Is there scoring needed, or is there some sort of system needed? And in Europe, there's certification. There's a development on Nutri-Score, and you might have heard that, but that gives an indication, an ABCDE score on the nutritional part of a product. And thoughts are, of course, is there also a score to be made about these on sustainability, like you would see on a washing machine or a fridge, that you would buy, and to assist consumers in those choices also. Interesting topic, I think.
Yeah, very interesting. Joshua?
Yes. So in terms of mindsets in Southeast Asia, I think it's so varied, because like when you look at the region, there's multiple countries, and each country probably has generically a different stance in how they approach sustainability. But then when you break it down into the consumer level and the corporate level, again, you're going to get the whole spectrum of people who are super into sustainability and really the front runners. But then you also have the ones who are a little bit more, I would say, more pragmatic, because like when you look in Asia, there is a segment of customers or consumers where basically they just need to meet the basic needs of getting food on the table. And to some extent, you could argue, or you could say that given what's on the market, there's a premium for sustainability. And so I guess it goes with any new product that you bring into the market, you will have different customer segments. And it's just about, which is the more dominant position that sort of paints the color around which country is more, leading the discourse when it comes to sustainability within the Southeast Asia region. But I would say it's definitely an area that, consumers and corporates here in Southeast Asia are very focused in. Taking it from the perspective of, large agri-food corporates who are, multinationals who are headquartered here in Singapore, sustainability is certainly an area that they're looking into. They're looking for technologies that can help them achieve the required goals and drivers that they've set for themselves. Even for the locally based, larger agri-food businesses in Asia, whilst they may have a very different approach and interpretation of sustainability, it's certainly still within their agendas.
And maybe to add upon that, Ling, it was also the question on your personal things, and I do live here in the city of Wageningen, where also Wageningen University is of course located, but there's quite some individuals looking into all sorts of ways of sustainability. And to make it practical, I enjoy that we go to a local gardening project in which we, with I think 250 households, share a vegetable garden, which is cultivated by a few people that are cultivating the crops, and the only thing we have to do is to harvest them and to go there. And I have 3 kids in the house, and they see those vegetables grow also. And I think those type of examples are also helpful to see, hey, then people see, or my kids see, where the food products actually come from, and that they are grown and that they develop over the year, etc. So those local initiatives, I think, also so crucial to make things close by. And for example, another is that we go to the local dairy farm and take the locally produced milk in glass bottles and bring back the bottles again, related to the packaging, and of course multiple ways of calculating on the impact on that. But here it seems that the use of glass is again logical if you directly bring it forth and back. So those things help, and I have to admit, being Dutch, we all like to go on our bicycle, go around, and find our way, and that's of course a big thing in Asia also. But I think those steps, hopefully help also.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much. All these ground initiatives definitely also help to push the awareness higher. So thank you, Joshua and Jerome, for the valuable insights. We have a lot of very good questions coming in the Q&A, and unfortunately, we have to quickly move on now to our Q&A session. Your job is not over yet, so please stay online. And I would like to welcome John back to our panel. So John is actually joining us to answer the questions from the participants today. Welcome back, John.
Thank you. I've been trying to answer a couple, but it's some really interesting ones.
Okay.
This is the most questions I've seen on the panel. Like,
I know, good engagement.
Yes, we have many good questions, very good questions. And we have also taken some questions that some of our participants have during registration, they have actually asked some questions as well. So there were quite a few questions on food waste management, and I think some of our innovations that we shared earlier have already answered those questions. So there's this question, right? I mean, there are a lot of questions on alternative proteins, which are very interesting. One question that came from that was pre-submitted prior to the event was, how natural is food grown from sustainable farming? Okay, and then there's also another question on sustainable farming, like what is organic farming versus sustainable farming? So all these questions, I think the person who asked this question on how natural is food grown from sustainable farming, he or she most probably is referring to alternative proteins, which is what we touched on earlier, and which is a topic of a strong interest. Actually, we have quite a few good questions here. Maybe I can ask a few of these questions. I can just share now, all on alternative proteins. So there's one question from Cheyenne Shuit. So Cheyenne asked, there are a lot of great technologies and alternatives for the food transition, but consumers also have to choose for these alternatives. So in your eyes, which technology or food product has the greatest potential for sustainable consumption, but needs a push in consumer adoption? Okay, there's another question on, is there a possibility for alternative meats shed the alternative label and still be the main option in consumer purchase decisions, since it's seen as more sustainable? Then there's another question on the topic of cost parity of animal protein versus alternative proteins. There are many externalities that today are not reflected on the prices of animal products. If those were considered, cost parity could be reached much sooner. Do you see government acting on that anytime soon? These are quite a number of questions on alternative proteins. So maybe three gentlemen here, John, Jerome, Joshua, or the J's, who would like to answer?
All right, it's Triple J.
Triple J's.
The hard questions.
No, yeah, there are questions, and you see also that there is, the political situation is to be included in those pathways, and I think in Europe, the dairy and meat support for production is indeed pretty significant, and I'm not an economics expert. I have to the pre-warning in the beginning already, but so coming from a food technology perspective, but there of course are quite some incentives to stimulate those type of products and productions, and I think as we speak with the COP 26 taking place, those things are items that play a role, and in Europe of course recently the Green Deal type of developments have been further identified and will be implemented, and that will most likely reflect also on how can we find a new balance between animal and plant-based proteins. And there is definitely on the technical side developments. We refer to from the Netherlands also. We have been a country that has been very active in dairy technology and dairy production, also meat and meat production. How can we utilize or rephrase the technology we use for all those products also into maybe plant-based options? And then it's a bit more from a technical point of view, but then legislation type of support programs will definitely help to assist that, and then indeed those will be on the agendas of governments, and already are, so to say.
Well, I think maybe if I could just sort of build on Jerome's points and sort of taking a step back with respect to bringing new products to the market. One of the questions I tried to answer, which was asked around, with alternative proteins, for example,
yes.
Are we sacrificing taste or flavor? Like fundamentally, as a consumer, if someone gives you a crap tasting food item, like why would you eat it? Why would you continue buying it? So like taste is non-compromisable. We've seen dozens, if not hundreds of, startups trying to come out with new alt protein or novel ingredient products. But, if you can't make a product which tastes good, you're not going anywhere. Price is another critical factor, right? And another question has kind of touched upon that. I think maybe just sort of tying it back into, Vanessa's question around the alternative label.
Yes.
And, the move was probably about 4 or 5 years ago when Beyond was lobbying US supermarkets to position their product in the meat aisle rather than like the vegetable aisle or some random sort of frozen food thing. Like Beyond paved the way for this this new segment of product by positioning its plant-based protein right next to the frozen animal protein. And I personally would love to believe that the day will come soon. Vanessa's point about not having like
an alternative label
and then alternative, right? It's all protein. At the end of the day, it's protein, and we as consumers, as humans, need to sort of retweak our mindset to just recognize that protein doesn't have to come from 2 legs or 4 legs or whatever, right? We can get it from, we can get protein from the ground. And tying it into another question, I guess, with respect to new products and novel ingredients, there's this whole variety of endless species, plant species on the planet, which we just haven't explored and we haven't experimented with. There's a company that we've invested in called Lava Foods. It was one of the pictures in my slides. They use pili nut, which is indigenous to Southeast Asia, as their sort of core ingredient in their non-animal based dairy. Or Fable using sort of shiitake mushroom, or here in Singapore, there's a company called What If Foods, which uses bambara groundnut. So these are all climate-friendly, regenerative crops, rich in nutrients, protein, all the rest of that. Mung beans for plant-based eggs. The options or the examples just go on and on. So we as consumers just have to open our eyes and be willing to experiment, try new things. Obviously, it's the brand's position, or the new company's position, to solve for taste and price, which is critical. And it's this sort of that challenge as they scale up and extract economies of scale, which will help these new startups, I guess, win more market share.
Yeah, thank you, John. So I think just building on the question you mentioned about the cost. So the question that was asked, right, is on the topic of cost parity of animal protein versus alternative proteins. So our participant is saying that today these are not reflected on the prices of animal proteins or animal products. And if those were considered, cost parity could be reached much sooner. Do you see governments acting on this anytime soon? Do you think anything will change in the near future? Maybe.
What's the sentiment in the Netherlands, Jerome?
Now, yeah, no, I think I addressed it a little bit earlier, so that the regulations or the green deals, etc., will develop. On one hand, it's also a balancing act right now. We have a farmer system that is fully focused on production of meat and dairy, and you cannot just ask everyone to just stop doing that and do the other things. And that process is ongoing. That is pretty, aggressive is maybe not the right word, but tense at sometimes. And I think we should find balance in that. And that's a crucial thing. And I want to also reflect that. Can we use those technology, for example, to make palatable products, exactly as John said? And do we find ways with hybrid products to help in that transition, and also, at a certain time, balance out also the price disbalance, what is, I think, there. And I think a lot of the crop-oriented products can be, must be at a certain time cheaper than animal-based type of products. But I think that's actually the transition we're writing.
You raised a really good point, because oftentimes when we look at new ventures, new technologies, it's what they do in isolation, and I think it's good to actually put that within the context that these companies, these technologies are disrupting the status quo at this stage. And when you look at the status quo, there are huge economies and supply chains that have been around that provides jobs for people that have fed the world in the last couple of decades. But we're seeing that there's a better way that we need to actually produce food and eat food. And so how do we then integrate this into the main way in which we produce and consume? There will be a transition. And so I guess my point is saying that we can't forget the context in which things need to operate in, and then how do you actually then introduce this, because you're going to be disrupting one group or the other in any way, because you're introducing something quite new.
Okay.
I think that ties into a broader question. I'm not sure if it's necessarily been asked this way, but when we're talking about a sustainable food system, which aspect of sustainability are we solving for? Obviously, sort of environmental is sort of top of mind, and we can point to technologies and solutions which are, helping to reduce greenhouse gases, or, lowering the sort of carbon footprint of food. And I think, that kind of ties into one of the questions in terms of price parity. If you can produce plant-based proteins or cell-based, even here in Singapore, as Josh mentioned, there's been this whole of government push to solving a national food sort of security. I don't want to say crisis, but for a brief moment in time last year, it was a crisis when borders closed, and suddenly for 48 hours, we didn't know where our sort of leafy veg was, or God forbid, the bubble teas would dry up. But yeah, so obviously, the concept of cell-based meat, for example, where we can literally be growing this in bioreactors, and the likes of Mossa Meats in the Netherlands, etc., as sort of pioneers in this space. And here in Singapore, we've put so much money into supporting this industry where we can literally have a sort of a bioreactor down the road, churning out this protein, and the reduction in sort of carbon footprint from a sort of supply chain and transportation perspective as well would be dramatically reduced. Same applies to urban vertical farms, and growing crops, growing plants indoors, ties back into these questions around carbon tax, which is very topical, but no one's necessarily, thankfully, nothing's been imposed yet, because that would be a massive impact. Talk about GST hikes or something. We as consumers and policymakers and in this sort of ecosystem actors need to think these things through, because it's going to have a significant impact on the cost of food.
Thank you, John. Yeah. So we have so many interesting questions still coming in, but unfortunately we've run out of time. There are some questions that I think are best directed to John and Joshua after this panel. So somebody asked, what are the critical criteria you are looking for when assessing a startup's business proposal? Okay, so these are very specific questions, which maybe this participant who asked this question can ask John or Joshua. I mean, we have John's email just now, and you flashed your slide. So one last question for the panel today is about food security, as John mentioned earlier. So would food security issues be turned into national security issues, leading to competition, among governments, among countries? So what do our panel think? Joshua, John,
yeah.
Jerome?
I can think of you. I mean, last year when we ran the Singapore Food Bowl, which is all around finding technologies to help Singapore achieve its 30 by 30 target, it was really great. We got solutions there, but as we engage with more stakeholders, in particular Enterprise Singapore and other government agencies, they realized that there's sensitivities with that as well, because there's an element of saying that, does that mean that you're just going to close your doors and ignore the rest? But I think what we're seeing is that food security is not just one country, it's actually a regional agenda. And so now when we're looking at the next evolution of our food bowl, it's around how do you look at food security from a regional perspective rather than just one country. So I think to your point, Ling, it could end up that way where, countries actually, try to, just look after themselves. But I don't think that's a really positive play. I think it needs to be more inclusive and actually look at how do you work with each other rather than against each other.
Well said.
Yeah, fully agree with that, Joshua. So it's really a global thing. And one aspect maybe to address in that is that we as Food Valley also joined forces with the World Economic Forum in the initiative of food innovation hubs all over the world. And that is, I think, also a crucial thing into develop adaptive environments to stimulate innovation at global level, and not just think about everyone's own situation, but rather share. And of course, also the large corporate multinationals are involved in that. And they also play a role, of course, in addressing the local supplies and how to utilize their brands and products at the different locations. And I think we can develop a lot in that. And then it's by definition not a national thing, but rather a worldwide approach is required to address that.
Yes, I agree with you. John, do you have anything else to add to this point?
No, I think the two gentlemen answered it very succinctly, but ultimately, we can't live in isolation. I mean, certainly not here in Singapore. We're a tiny little red dot with less than 1% of land mass allocated to agricultural production. In the Netherlands, most of your land is based below sea level. So if, climate change, continues to raise sea levels, you're going to have to rethink your own methods of sort of production, et cetera. So we've all got to innovate. We need to be sharing technologies, working together. We're all on the same planet at the end of the day. So we need to be open-minded, and it's all about sort of collaboration in this space.
Work together, Cool.
global
Okay.
solutions or global problems to ask for global solutions. That's the thing I can only address as a global connection person.
Global, yeah. Global problem, ask for global solution, as well said. Okay, so I'm sorry, we've run out of time. So with this last question, we've come to the end of our Q&A. Thank you so much, John, Joshua, Jerome, for providing such candid and thought-provoking answers to our very tough questions. So over to you, Bao Hui.
All right. Thank you so much, Joshua, Jerome, and John for your perspectives, and Ling for the deft moderation. That was a very rigorous discussion. Thank you all to everyone in the audience as well for raising such considered questions. You know, it was definitely a first for us extending today's session. So I believe we have so many questions left to answer post-event. Do reach out to our speakers today to continue the conversations from where we started. So we'd appreciate if you could take some time to fill out our survey that can be accessed through the QR code that we're flashing very shortly, or through the link that my colleagues will be sending across in the chat very shortly. This survey will take less than 3 minutes, but will go a long way in helping us do better for future events. And we've also created a field for you to share more about what else you'd like to see from us following this event. And of course, to entice you further, and with the year-end gifting season just around the corner, SGN is pleased to share with you an exclusive list of perks from Singapore brands for new and existing SGN members called SGN Joys. SGN Joys is an e-catalog of promotions and discounts curated from Singapore brands and available to SGN members only. So to find out more and to sign up with SGN while you're at it, scan the second QR code that's right here now on this slide. And when you register for our mailing list, you'll be in the know of upcoming events like today's one and get connected to our community all around the world. So before we close, quite a number of announcements today, but I promise this is the final one. Here's a call out on the upcoming Singapore Week of Innovation and Technology Festival, or SWITCH, happening next week from 8 to 12 of November, organized by Enterprise Singapore, who have also kindly supported our session today. SWITCH is a gathering of thinkers, leaders, entrepreneurs, and creators from the global Asia innovation ecosystem. Emerging from a year of huge global disruption, SWITCH 2021 will enable conversations on leveraging innovation to rebuild sustainably across industries and communities, address persistent global challenges, and to advance towards a stronger and more inclusive future together. To find out more about SWITCH, you know what to do. Scan the QR code on this slide as well. All of that being said, on behalf of SGN and EDB, thank you all so much for tuning in today, and we hope to see you all soon at our future events. Stay safe, everyone. Bye.